Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast for the recap of Strade Bianche men and women. They're one file on podcast players on YouTube. We did the live stream of the women's earlier, but the men's recap, we have 215 or 18 kilometers, not sure exactly, including neutral from Siena to Siena, and it starts pretty much with gravel out the gate, and in fact, the vast majority, well over, I think, 80% of the gravel kilometers are in the first two-thirds of this race, and in the last 75 Ks, there's not actually that much gravel. The main sections you need to be aware of are San Martino, the 7th or 8th sector, and then the Santa Maria sectors. They're the two longest and hardest ones with the steepest climbs. Santa Maria coming with about 80 Ks to go in the race. Then there's a long stretch of tarmac, and then they start the circuit around La Tolfe and Pinzuto. Pinzuto is a bit longer and punchy. Then La Tolfe is a really steep, short climb before obviously the finish in Siena. Pogacar, the heavy favourite, of course, before the race. Pidcock lining up. And also, Pidcock was bullish pre-race.
Yeah, Pidcock was bullish pre-race. I think he was asked, I'll quote him in my words, but he was asked something along the lines of, how does one beat Pogacar? And he said, by reaching the finish line before Pogacar. I'm going to try and follow Pogacar, is what he said when he attacks. And we'll see if that happens. We'll see if that's possible. But he received quite a bit of criticism for being so confident before the race. And I feel like in cycling, there's this two-sided thing where on one end, the cycling fans as a whole, myself sometimes included, for example, remember that, was it 2018 Giro d'Italia, where Simon Yates came out and said, if I was my competition, I'd be shitting myself?
Yeah.
On one end, I was thinking, this guy's being an idiot right now. But on the other end, that is the stuff I want in the sport, you know?
Well, if everyone just decides to let Pogacar win straight away before they start the race, what's the point in turning up? I mean, yes, some riders, like, it's just not realistic at all. Like, it's just stupid. But, you know, like last year, if you're, and you could see, Pidcock, you have to be on the wheel. And so this goes back to his UAE Tour attack, Pogacar's UAE Tour attack. It goes back to his Galibier attack and Isola attack. His attacks at the moment, the last year, are not like in the drop sprinting. He just does a 30-second as hard as, he basically just goes as hard as possible to the drop without actually like sprinting. And so if you're in the wheel getting a draft, in theory, you might be able to survive. Last year, Kuss lost the wheel before he even attacked. And then he's got a gap and then it's over. So Pidcock was absolutely, from the start of coverage, was on Pogacar's wheel the entire time.
Yep. Kyoto as well, in the wheel of Pidcock as well, very early. And to be honest, we go into the coverage like this, but we got to talk about the stuff we didn't see for a second, because coverage started. I'm watching with roughly 95 to 100 kilometers to go. I see a peloton, and I'm like, okay, calling it a peloton is probably exaggerating a little bit, because there were like 35 riders left, roughly, is my estimation.
Less, I reckon. 20.
I was
25.
wondering what happened before the broadcast. And we heard a few things left and right. Okay, a few crashes. Godu was out of the race, for example.
Yep,
we heard
Scaroni.
lots of people having mechanicals, including the likes of Grosschartner, I think, during the race. Aramburu had disappeared. Wellens had temporarily disappeared, but then suddenly on the broadcast was actually in position. So maybe something would have happened to Wellens before broadcast. I don't know, but he was certainly there when he needed to be. But lots of riders were not there that I expected to be there. Like, I was watching the group and I looked for Astana riders, because Scaroni was a podium candidate in my personal opinion after seeing him in the pro races in the last couple of months. The man was not there, not a single Astana rider. So I thought, okay, something must have happened in these previous sectors. Turns out he crashed, perhaps a collarbone fracture. Matthias Watzek, super strong on the Muur van Gerardsberg and Bosberg in Omloop, looking for little track riders, could barely see any. Yeah, Albert Whitten Philipsen was in the early breakaway today, which that was cool to see. But apparently Watzek also crashed. I don't know if there's consequences there. So many riders will probably have come out with a story of their own Strade Bianche that we did not experience on the broadcast. And hopefully not too many of those stories include crashes, because it sounds like a lot of them did, you know?
Yeah, that's, I mean, they keep lengthening the race. And then every year coverage starts, we've missed like 70% of the gravel sectors.
Yeah.
It's a peloton of 20 riders. And we're like, okay, but we've got San Remo full coverage. in a week and a half. I don't really understand. Yeah, it would be because that's when a lot of the racing's happening, I guess. Early, like the break formation. Who's trying to? Can we criticize teams for not jumping in the break? How many teams try to jump in the break? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But there, if you got in the breakaway, you gave yourself a good chance in Strade. Guys have survived pretty long, like in Roubaix.
And like breakaway wise, it was an okay breakaway. When I saw it, I said Albert Witten Philipsen, talented rider on Little Trek. He's very good at like all these different disciplines and is now coming up in the actual professional team of Little Trek. So I was curious to see what can he do from that breakaway. Lisa Peitersen in there. I'm doing this off the top of my head. So we had the likes of Connor Swift in there as well, Lewis Askey, and a couple of other riders. In the end, there's only one rider from this breakaway that makes a real mark in this race, but we'll get to that later because you mentioned it already, San Martino in Grania, that whatever number of sector it is just before Monte Santi Mari with about 95 to 100 kilometers to go. But before this race starts, my thought is solely on the Monte Santi Mari. Like, we've seen the Monte Santi Mari be the climb that explodes the race for the last couple of years, not just with this current parkour. Yes, last year, Pogacar launched on the Monte Santi Mari because that is a sector that fits him and his team the most to launch, but it also fits a lot of riders the most to make longer attacks, because in the years before, even in, was it 2023, Pogacar attacked as well on the Monte Santa Maria, but then it was roughly 50 kilometers from the finish line. And the year before, I swear the group also exploded on the Monte Santa Maria. So that is the sector in Strade, regardless of where in the race it is. I don't know, if you put it at the start, maybe there's a different scenario. But in the positions that it has been in the last 5 years, it is always the sector that is going to blow up whatever is left of the group that we have. And that was looking like it. And to be honest, UAE still had numbers, right? Del Toro, Wellens, Pogacar, maybe one more before the sector.
Vermeersch had been doing a really good job, way better than in Omloop. And yeah, the race was playing out exactly as we said it would. UAE put it in a line as hard as possible and drop their riders one by one. And then they do the lead out on Santa Maria. It's the safest way for Pog to not have, look at how many riders, Scaroni, Collarbone, Gaudu out, loads of riders crashing early. You don't want to be in the peloton. So they put it in a line. And that's exactly. And Wellens was on the PCS live tracker. Like Wellens, it said he was dropping, but he was right there in front of Pogacar to do the final lead out. And we get to Monte Santa Maria. That happens. Del Toro starts. Wellens doesn't really take over, and then Pidcock, who's side by side with, he'd gone in front of Pogacar, which is always a risk. He attacks first. He attacks, but obviously was leaving something in the tank, and Pogacar goes over the top of him. Again, like we said, it's a seated attack. It's Pidcock's actually the one out of the saddle. Pogacar's seated, and he's holding on really close to letting him go just there on Monte Santa Maria, and the race was nearly over there. But he's able to hold on. Rouge Adria was actually there for a little while, but he goes back to a group of Van Eitveld, Bilbao, Valger, and Healy.
Magnus Kort, maybe the group behind
Johannesson.
Yes, so like lots of riders that you would like expect to be the fighting for a top 10, fighting for a top 15, especially knowing that some of the riders we expect to be in the top 10 aren't there anymore. But to be honest, I was just happy at this point in the race. You said it already. When Pidcock launches, first of all, to me it seemed like Del Toro's turn was very short. And it looked like Wellens was kind of surprised by that and then goes to the front, paces a little bit. And once Wellens' turn ends, it's like Pidcock anticipates it a little bit because he knows Pogacar is going to attack when Wellens' turn ends. And to me, it felt like Pidcock anticipates that by making a move himself. Maybe I'm overreading it. And in doing so, trying to upset that situation a little bit. But then Pogacar just goes off the wheel of Pidcock, like you mentioned. And like at this point in the race, we get a little bit further, Pidcock still in the wheel. A little bit further, Pidcock still in the wheel. And I'm just happy that we have a race, because last year, TV was off, race was over.
Exactly. And Pidcock, I mean, if he's not dropped in there, then he's got a good chance of following at least for a good while. On the easier gravel sectors, he's also got the technical ability that if he does get a little bit gapped, maybe he can come back in a descent on these shorter climbs afterwards. And indeed, Pogacar can't shake him. He tried a few more times. They get past the break, and eventually they reach an alliance. And the question is, they get to this long tarmac section after Monte Santa Maria, before the first Pinzuto. Well, what are they going to do? Pidcock pulls with Poggy on the flatter sections, and then lets Pogacar do a lot of the uphills initially on the tarmac, and he starts to pull with Pogacar. And I think I don't have a problem with it. Firstly, as long as you're just pull, but 20% of the work. You don't have to be a hero. Yep. So it looked more like 50-50 to me. Secondly, if you're just with Pogacar, I know Connor Swift erasure. Connor Swift was there, sitting on the back. But if you're just with Pogacar, it's a lot easier before you get to a pivotal sector to be on the wheel of Pogacar. There's no one to give Pogacar a lead out. There's no other riders fighting you for his wheel. You just sit on his wheel. Or the alternative is, Benji, is you refuse to pull, and then what does Pogacar do?
Well, if you completely refuse to pull, then Pogacar will likely want to get rid of you. As simple as that. As early as possible. Well, true, but he's going to continue doing that. But then eventually you might end up in a situation, let's say worst case scenario, Pidcock doesn't pull, Pogacar says, okay, can't get rid of you, I'm not going to pull either then. Then they reset the situation. If you're Pidcock and it resets and we see that group with, what was it, the Magnus Korts of the world, that second group with Healy and so forth, we see that group come back. Is that a scenario you like when you're Pogacar? Is that a scenario that you like when you're Pidcock? If you're Pogacar, it opens you up a little bit to maybe anticipation attacks by the likes of a Healy and so forth. If you're Pidcock, it kind of does the same, no?
It does, but if Healy anticipates, that's not a Tom Pidcock problem.
On paper, it isn't, but it might end up being a problem if the race turns out where you're not actually getting a P2 position out of the race.
Yeah, and the reality is...
That's the gamble.
Pogacar had Wellens behind. So True. You reset it, and then you get to, say, Pinzuto, Wellens will just do the lead out for Poggy again. So I don't really have a problem with Pidcock pulling, actually.
Same.
You kind of, especially on this tarmac zone, you get dragged away from the others who just have Group 2 syndrome. And then, maybe Pogacar can't drop you and you get to Siena. Maybe. Anyway, we see in that group, it's not working well behind. They quickly get a minute 30. The UAE car gets across, but I didn't see the Q365 car. So there's the UAE car behind Pogacar, Pidcock, and Swift. It's like Gianni Vermeersch also, True. One of the race of his career. He's anticipating with a Bilbao and an Adria trying to get ahead. EF are chasing. So it's all chaos behind, not getting any closer. Colle Pinzuto.
Was it before the sector or just after that the vital moment happens? Because it was around 50 kilometers to go.
I think it was after.
That's very possible. Because Pinzuto is slightly uphill. It would be logical that there's a descent afterwards. And I'm pretty sure that it's a asphalt descent that comes off. And then we suddenly see...
the descent after La Tolfe.
Really? Was it already...
Maybe
I
I'm
think
wrong.
so.
I don't know.
Either way, roughly 50 kilometers to go. We see a descent. Before we get to what happens, have you seen anything when it comes to descending differences between the two riders before we get to the event?
Well, there's two things. Firstly, they went through a feed zone. Pogacar was kind of angry at his soigneur for, I don't know, giving him something different, but then he gives a bid on to Pidcock, which... But that says everything about how Pogacar feels, right?
Is that how Jan Geert got poisoned?
Well, yeah. It's like, was there concrete in that bid on? I wouldn't have taken it. But is he ever giving Vingegaard a bid on?
I don't think so.
Probably wouldn't give it to MVDP either. In the Flanders final, after it's open on second qualifying, is he going to give MVDP a bid on? So that was kind of an indication that Pogacar was feeling relaxed at that moment. But what you mentioned, Benji, there was some after some tarmac sections. There's a lot of dust on the after the gravel sections. There's some tarmac descents with a lot of dust in the corners. And a lot of shitty road surfaces. And there's been crashes today, last year in Sheffield, where people just go way too hot into these corners. There's some left-rights that surprise people like Niewiadoma. And I noticed Pogacar was gapping Pidcock on the tarmac descents.
Yeah.
Really pushing.
Taking risks.
Taking risks and not pedaling descents. On the technical sections, he was gapping Pidcock, who was taking good lines. And I'm pretty sure he's a good descender, Tom Pidcock. And I was like,
yes.
Fuck, he's pushing. And then we see the camera cuts back. Pogacar's in a thorn bush, and there's a fast left-hand corner. He's come in first. He's come in way too narrow after, I think, a right-hander, and he's just slid out, hit his shoulder, doesn't hit his head, doesn't put his hand out. It's a miracle he didn't break his collarbone, miracle he didn't break his shoulder, and a miracle he didn't hit his head. Misses the sort of traffic little short pole and goes into a thorn bush, which actually it was kind of a soft landing.
Yes.
It's better than hitting a wall or something.
Yeah, for sure. But also, reanalyzing the crash, I think Luc Grefte, a man we all know on this podcast, our producer, also pointed this out on Twitter. If you analyze the crash, he also does exactly what you'd like to do in an ideal situation in a crash, which is holding your limbs with your body, trying to hold the handlebars as long as possible. In doing so, not putting your hand out, because I'm not an expert in crashing, because, well, the last time I crashed was the only time I crashed, and I broke my elbow at 0 kph. So great memories. But on paper, when you put your hand out, it's more dangerous, etc. Do you think riders learn to crash?
Nah, it's got to be instinctual. And also, like, he literally was tipping it in and just bang. Like, there's there's barely any time to put his hand out. He's going like 60. It's more when you go over the handlebars, rather than when you go over the handlebars, if you put your hand out, you're breaking your collarbone. But some riders do it better than others. Like Poggy, he never broke his collarbone, just about. And he's crashed too. And he crashed hard today. And so we see the front on shot, Pidcock seen Pogacar's crash. Pidcock was behind him. This is a recurring theme, Benji, that Pogacar, when he's taking his own lines on descents, when maybe the race situation is different to how he expected it, he can crash. He did it in the 2022 Tour de France on the descent before Hautacam. He nearly did it on the Galibier last year, and he does it here. Way too hot into the corner. And he then has to change his bike. He seemed very lucid, though. He immediately got back on the bike. Machin did the bobsled push, and then he says something's wrong with the bike, changed the bike, and then he's coming back. But what were you thinking at that moment that Pidcock should do?
Well, first of all, when it comes to Pidcock, at first he kept going. Gap was roughly 30 seconds. To be clear, they were at 3 before the crash happened. Pidcock ended up seeing Pogacar crash in front of him. Pidcock rode by, which is logical, and kept going, which is fine. It's part of cycling, staying on the bike. So there's no reason for Pidcock to morally, ethically have to wait. That's not the case here. He can choose to do so or not. That's the next part. But I'd say the biggest victim of the crash, unironically, is actually Connor Swift, who is held up by the crash, therefore not with Pidcock, and does not have the physical capabilities of Pogacar to get back to Pidcock from that point onwards. So that crash actually takes Connor Swift out of the race for I'm not sure he would have podiumed anyway, but for a potential podium in this race. And now when it comes to Pidcock itself, first of all, Pogacar ends up smashing, first of all, mechanical bike change, like you say, bobsled by Machin. Pogacar ends up closing the first 18 seconds of the 30-second gap. Then we get a shot of Pidcock, who is waiting. And there's a lot of people that are online like, okay, our mistake, huh? Why is Pidcock waiting in this situation? Stuff like that. In my opinion, he shouldn't have waited, but I don't think it influences the race at all that he did.
And you got to also look at the sectors they're in. It's a long tarmac sector before the next Pinzuto. Pidcock doesn't have an advantage on Pogacar on 2% up and down on the tarmac. Pogacar's heavier than him. Pogacar has way more absolute power than him. Pidcock's way smaller. He wasn't going anywhere. I think he was pushing hard on the flat. He was going nowhere. And that's the problem for him, is his punch is what was equal to Pogacar and then staying in the wheel. And yeah, Pogacar was coming back really, really fast. My question was, you can't criticize Pidcock, I think, much for this ride at all. He's the only one that had the cojones to try to follow Pogacar. He still relayed with him, except this next 20-minute phase. Like, I agree, and especially in a gravel race, if someone crashes in front of you because they mistake a corner, that's their problem. Yeah, they fucked up the corner. Like, I feel like Pidcock let Pogacar come back into the race at he did exactly what Poggy would have wanted then. He was pulling, I would say, most of the time for the next 20 minutes, And Pogacar was rattled. He was missing every corner. He was not descending in the drops. He was on the hoods. He was ginger. He just crashed at 60. And the car was there, got the feed. I think that this phase played pretty well into Pogacar's hands.
I would think so as well. Like I said, I don't really mind the waiting. I think I'm okay with it. Because let's be honest, if he didn't wait, Pogacar would have been back 20 seconds later anyway. So that waiting wouldn't have impacted anything. It's more the fact that instead of relaying 30% throughout the race, I feel like Pidcock was relaying 50% of the race. And in this phase, like you mentioned, more than Pogacar, which benefits Pogacar. So yeah, that's the part I don't necessarily like. But in general, I don't really want to criticize Tom Pidcock for today's ride because he had the guts to call it before the race that he wants to ride for the victory, which the rest of the peloton basically didn't have vocally. And then eventually he's the one that's actually on the wheel of Pogacar on Monte Sant'Amaria. He is with Pogacar. He follows him. He has the guts to ride for a potential victory, even too much in doing so. At the end of the day, I think he's definitely a 50% MVP of this race, that's for sure. So,
definitely gave us something to watch.
Exactly, because without Pidcock, man, TV would have been off with 80 kilometers to go again.
Yeah, like they got to take out the extra lap of Latoff and Pinzuto.
Yeah,
like this race drags. Even though this was better today, it was better with Pidcock. It drags. Like they finished Monte Sant'Amaria and you're just waiting. Okay, like now then they do 45 minutes just tarmac. Yep. You're like with the motos deciding what the gaps will be between the groups.
By the way, that is so true.
Yeah, Wellens only like the group 2 motorbike at one point was obscene. It literally dragged them 20 seconds closer on a descending section towards group 1, who then they got to the climb and group 1 was pushing way harder than those guys.
Yeah. And it's not the only race where this happens, Strade Bianche. It's like literally half of the races we watch, there's Laigueglia. Half the race we watch, there's a motorbike too close to a group.
Hey, Italian Spring Pro, when they got 3 motos in front, 3 motos 1 meter behind. To me, that's nostalgia. We allow it. But World Tour, it's like watching if you watch the 93 Laigueglia, the one Lance won, the motor is like in the middle of 20 motorbikes, just dragging them everywhere. That's heritage. But a World Tour race and Monument is probably not.
Yeah, fair. Anyway, to set the scene,
Group
Pogacar
2
and Pidcock are basically still off the front with about, let's say, 45-ish, 40 kilometers to go, that situation. And behind we have Connor Swift basically slowly getting caught by Group 2, which includes the likes of Tim Wellens, Ben Healy, and a couple of other riders. And we're now reaching towards the final Colle Pinzuto and the final Tolfe, right?
We are indeed. And we get to Pinzuto, the last Pinzuto. There's been no attacks from between Pogacar and Pidcock. They've just been riding together. And this is the criticism I have of Pidcock. Tour of Flanders, Omloop, other races. He's hit the 200k wall and exploded. And at the end, in the last half an hour of a race, I feel like he was just a little bit generous. And I even think the crash made him more generous. Because if Poggy hadn't crashed, he would have been so wary of, like, triple wary of him.
True.
And then even we would think, Pog looks a bit fucked up, because he did. You know, he did. He's got half his left skin is missing, and they get to Pinzuto
Let's
and
hope
Pogacar.
it's just skin.
Yeah, it would be. No way you could descend on gravel like that with a broken shoulder blade, surely.
Mate, Marc Soler finished with 2 broken arms, remember?
Yeah, but he didn't win. I don't think he won that day. It was a gravel race. And yeah, Pogacar drops the hammer on Pinzuto. It's a long attack. It's just this long attack waiting to shake Pidcock. Pidcock's out of the saddle, and then the gap opens up, and then that's all she wrote. Pogacar goes solo. Pidcock has to settle back into his rhythm. Quickly, the gap goes to 1 minute. Wellens attacks the group behind of Healy, Adria, Bilbao, Vermeersch. Caught. He goes solo. He heard that Pogacar was solo, and he gets let off the lead. And he's closing quickly on Pidcock. The gap even goes to 40 seconds. We're like, is Pidcock going to full crack? He doesn't full crack. And yeah, Pogacar rides away solo, wins in Siena. Pidcock holds on to second place. Wellens third. So UAE 2 on the podium. Ben Healy fourth, which is a good result for him because last year, actually, he was not. Last year, Healy did not top 10 a World Tour one-day race after his breakout season. Now, I am being cheeky because he top 10 world champs in Olympics, but in spring he wasn't so good for his level, and so he's really in a good level. Bilbao 5th, Court 6th, Vermeersch 7th, Valgren 8th, Van Eetveld 9th, Adria 10th.
Mate, Bilbao, 4 times Strade Bianche, 4 times top 10. The stat just keeps on giving. But I want to bring us to a discussion point here. Pogacar last year, 80 kilometers to go, steps on the gas, drops everybody right to the victory. Pogacar this year, 80 kilometers to go, steps on the gas, can't drop everybody, still wins impressively after crashing. But the question mark now is, what does this mean relative to last year? And does this impact your feelings towards a battle between Pogacar and Van der Poel maybe being closer at RVV than you would have thought before today?
I definitely think Roubaix, like, Van der Poel shouldn't be that scared of Pogacar.
Fair.
Maybe that's wrong and he'll still win, but yeah.
I agree with you on that, to be clear.
RVV, to be honest, like, the problem is that I know these seem like small things, but they become big things. If you don't start second time Quamont or the Quamont on Pogacar's wheel, then and he can attack and do this sort of burst where he's in the saddle doing his 30-second attack, and then Van der Poel has to close it. Well, like you saw, he actually chose not to close it in 2023.
Yeah.
To me, that's not changed. What today showed to me is, before the pivotal moment, you have to be on his fucking wheel. Because then you actually, I'm not talking for your run-of-the-mill, I'm not talking about for me or for Ruja Adria, I'm talking about Pidcock Van der Poel here. If Van der Poel's on his wheel, yeah, he can follow.
Adria was basically on his wheel before Pidcock robbed it on the Monte Santa Maria, so credits to the man. He rode very well today. But I fully agree with you today. I also think that the outer Quadramont length effort and so forth, still the same impressive Pogacar that we had in the past. It's not the same. We mentioned already a couple times this year that maybe when it comes to the punch, there's a slight bit less in the last year, but it's the outer Quadramont length efforts where Pogacar makes a difference. So those are seemingly still the ones where Pogacar is very dominant against everybody. And then my other question is, yes, Pogacar crashes on an asphalt descent today, but is there any chance, let's say any of the Roubaix rumors for Pogacar were true, that this crash impacts a participation at Roubaix?
I'm not sure. I still don't think he's doing Roubaix, but maybe they're just deciding, like, if he feels good after, it's the week after Flanders. If he feels good, then he does it.
I would, honestly, if 2 weeks ago it came out that Pogacar rode Roubaix, I'd be surprised by that fact, because I wouldn't expect him to risk that for the rest of the season. Because, like, we've seen it with LBL
broke his collarbone
well.
today.
Exactly. Every single race of this caliber with the risks that exist on Roubaix, with the risks that exist of Strade Bianche, is a risk of potentially not being there at full power at the Tour de France again. Which, yes, in cycling, that happens. GC leaders, every top 20 rider, in my personal opinion, has at some point skipped the race to make sure it doesn't hinder them from being injured or impacted for one of their big races. Why is Wout van Aert skipping MSR every year? Like, for altitude camp partially, but also because every single race you add is another race where you're in a racing speed, fighting against the best in the world, and risking yourself in front of your other goals. We saw it at Dwars of Vlaanderen last year. So I believe that's an active thing for every single top rider. And in that effect, it wouldn't shock me that Pogacar doesn't show up for Paris-Roubaix.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if he does it. And he's got to get through the Belgian Classics unscathed first. I think what's clear is that MVDP's burst is still way stronger than Pogacar's on a shallow gradient or cobbles or flat. And we saw in Le Samin, he literally went to the front of a good group, by the way, Paul Magnier, and just fucking nuked them uphill in his sprint. And there's no way. Yeah, Pogacar's also subject to the laws of physics. He weighs 10 kilos less than Van der Poel, who's the most explosive rider in the world. That's the only element where you're like, What also showed to me today, Benji, is Gianni Vermeersch is flying and Alpecin might not miss Søren Kragh Andersen as much as I thought. And the Alpecin, like in Omloop, they were unbelievable. Alpecin looked so good as a block. Kierich and Vermeersch and Van der Poel. So I still think, if I was Van der Poel watching today, I wouldn't be more scared than I was before today.
Yeah, I agree with you. If anything, it gives you a bit more on the other end because the expectations before today was that Pogacar was going to drop everybody with 80 kilometers to go on Monte Santi Maria. Those were the general expectations. For that not to happen, it's hard to hold that against him because he still crashed and ended up winning the race very comfortably. But it's a sparkle of extra hope or a sparkle of extra motivation of like, okay, we from Van der Poel's side, I got this guy, that kind of vibe. Which maybe that's true. Maybe it's not true. Maybe Pidcock just had a very good day today. That's also a possibility.
Let's run a hypothetical. Second Kwaremont, Pogacar launches, thins it.
Yes.
Group comes back, 6 guys. Van Aert, Jorgensen, Van der Poel, Vermeersch, main guys. Pogacar Van der Poel attacks on the Paterberg. 50, 45 Ks to go. Pogacar goes with him. He shouldn't relay. If that's
Both
what
of them are relaying.
But he should not relay.
But it's Pogacar and it's Van der Poel. So
if you chop off at threshold with him in one of these hard classics, he will just drop you. But I agree, he will relay, and I'm not sure it's correct because, unlike Pidcock, there is a clear path to Van der Poel winning Flanders. Go to the finish with Pogacar. It's a flat finish, like in 22. So, that's just an interesting hypothetical. I also don't know the answer, but I would tend to chill out. Anything else from Strade Bianche?
Let me try and see if I can find something to discuss. Well, first of all, I want to put something right. Me and my Belgian soul were insulted today when he said this was one of Vermeer's career race. My man, do you not remember the performance prowess he showed last year in Paris-Roubaix? That was his career race. Today was not even close to that. His career race will come in Paris-Roubaix this year. I can feel
Roubaix, that was some gimmick, just never taking a pull. No, but he's just sitting in the wheel. Now, first of all, what happened? Basically, he got through Arenberg in front.
Yeah.
Everyone got crashed out behind or flattered, and then he just sat in the wheels whilst Van der Poel went solo.
Yeah, but Alpecin destroyed it.
Yeah, good level
already.
Yeah, but Benji, today he was trying to follow Pogacar and shit. I was like, what? In Strade Bianche. I was like, what's going on? I know it's a monument, but today I was like, what? Because he was racing today. He was the leader today.
Let's agree that he was good in both races.
He was. I'm scared of Gianni Vermeersch. Just generally. I think a lot of people are scared of Gianni Vermeersch. All right. That's it from the men's Strade Bianche. We have to watch the finish of GP Crillon. Whatever that is. And
I'll do an FTP test instead.
Yeah, actually, I'm going for a hike. I got new shoes, new trail running shoes, and no free plugs. And I was the video of the dad video of new shoes, running in the store. I'm in the house, so much grip.
I expect you to go on your hike and do one of those dad selfies where you're in the corner of the screen and your shoe is on the other side of it, like a dad in front of his barbecue. I want to see that on Instagram tonight.
It's the weather's so bad, but Toby will kill me if I don't get out. All right, thanks for listening. We're going to do the women's Strade Bianche recap now. Till next time. Ciao.